Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Stephen J. Palacini. I'm a regulated Canadian immigration consultant, and I'm here to talk about the Canada-Colombia Free Trade Agreement and how that would pertain to Colombians seeking to work in Canada with an LMIA exemption. So this is, I'd say, a pathway that I don't see utilized too frequently, or that not a lot of Colombians have been considering. And I want to provide an overview about it, how it works. I'm going to talk about why it's beneficial if you're seeking to work in Canada or stay in Canada as a Colombian, apply for a work permit, talk about the free trade agreement, how it works, the benefits to employers, the benefits to foreign workers. So let's just dive right in. So what is the Canada-Colombia Free Trade Agreement? Well, it's a free trade agreement that was signed into effect, I believe, under the Harper era, Harper's government. So the full details of it you can find on the Global Affairs website, because it is a free trade agreement. But what we're interested in it is people who can use an LMIA exemption, so avoiding the LMIA process to work in Canada. The main requirement, I'd say, is to be a Colombian citizen, right? So having a Colombian passport, that's number one. And the second requirement is to have an offer of employment submitted by an employer, a Canadian employer, okay, through the employer portal with IRCC. It's that simple. The other thing is it has to be in an eligible occupation. And I'll show you where you can find the eligible occupations. Also, how you can evaluate whether or not you qualify for an eligible occupation, or how you can go about basically qualifying yourself for this pathway, right? So I'm hoping to provide some advice and guidance and show you guys basically what a consultant would go through, the process they would go through to determine whether or not somebody qualifies for the Canada-Colombia Free Trade Agreement. And then I'm going to dive into the employer process, what the employer has to do, because I want to arm you guys with knowledge that how can you sell this to your employer. There's obviously the whole work permit application process, and I can do another video on that. But for now, I want to keep it to what you can start looking at. And I'll put all these links in the description below, and subscribe to my channel, please, because I want to continue to be able to put out more content like this, showing people how to think like a consultant, how to do your own applications, how to convince employers to hire you, how to find employment in Canada, and basically the entire process behind it, right? So this is a part of the Canada-Colombia Free Trade Agreement. I will post this link below, but here are the professionals and technicians and the occupations that are allowed, okay? That you can be basically, well, the professionals are on a negative list. They're not covered. The technicians are issued using a positive list. So let's go back to the exemption codes. Let me talk about this for a bit. In all cases, if you can get a work permit without an LMIA, you automatically want to first try and pre-qualify yourself for the International Mobility Program, which is outside the LMIA regime. LMIAs take 5 to 6 months to get approved. They have a 28-day advertising period. You have to spend money on advertising. An employer, likely most employers do, hire consultants and pay between $2,000 to $4,000 to do the LMIA process. There's a $1,000 government fee for each LMIA with work permit support. So there's a greater cost borne by employers. So in all cases, you want to first look towards the International Mobility Program. Do you have a pathway there to working in Canada? And this is the pathway that is just, for Colombians working in particular occupations. So these are all the exemption codes and where you can find them. I'll also post this link, but here they all are. And they're based upon things like your citizenship, marital status even, because under here is where spousal open work permit falls under. Business immigration streams like startup business class, SUV. I do a lot of those. Certain that are designated by ministers, competitiveness and public policy, exemption. These are all the exemption codes, okay? And they're very restricted and limited for the most part. But if you are, for example, Colombian, you're able to access all of these exemption codes, okay? Now, let's go see what they put about F12, which is the Colombia, professionals or technicians. This is what most people are going to fall under, trader and investor. There's a lot of, high net worth requirements for that. So let's look at what they put. They don't put very good information here. But what they do say is that the occupations are identical, almost identical to the Canada-Peru FTA. So I've usually referenced the Canada-Peru FTA in work permit applications for Colombian nationals, because this is where the professions are not covered, and the other ones that are, the technical occupations, are listed. So basically, it's any of these occupations, so technicians that are covered, and these are professionals that are not covered. So nobody in healthcare, education, or social services occupations. So how do you know what your job falls under? Well, let's start reading just up here a little bit too. They're listed using a negative list. I've mentioned that. So if they're here, doesn't qualify. Now, professional means a national of a party who's engaged in a specialty occupation, but it means an occupation within the tier category 0 or 1 under the NOC, okay? So the NOC, all occupations, like jobs in Canada, are classified with the NOC. I believe there's 516 different types of occupations. I'll go through that. I'll show you how you can find out what is your NOC, right? It's pretty obvious for certain jobs and occupations, and I'll use one as an example for this video, okay? When we get through it all. But just so you understand, this is what you're going to want to be looking at. Say, okay, I want to work in Canada, I want to stay in Canada, I want to change to work status in Canada, or I want to get arranged employment in Canada under the Canada-Colombia Free Trade Agreement. What's the first thing you're going to do? See if you can get a job offer, okay? Now, if you can only use it if you're getting a job offer in an eligible occupation, okay? So you have to find out, is your occupation eligible? Now, let's do it. Okay, construction laborer. I'm going to tell you right now, it's not. Why? Because it's not a professional or a technician. It's a unskilled job. And the tier categories, there's 6 tier categories in Canada, 0, 1, 2, and 3. Those 4 are considered skilled occupations. They count for Canadian work experience and express entry. They count for arranged employment when you get job offers. 4 and 5 are unskilled. And I know construction labor, without even searching for it, is unskilled, but we could check it out here. So this is where you find all the NOCs in Canada, and you can even do the NOC quiz and figure out how well you know the NOC, National Occupational Classification. So let's look at construction laborer. Okay, this is an example of, well, this would be, constructions, trades, helpers, and laborers. So they have the what they call the, this is, I don't want to say the unit group, but this is the actual NOC code, okay? It'll be a 5-digit code, 75110. You can determine a few things from the NOC. So 7 is what's called the broad occupational category. Yep, right here. Trades, transport, and equipment operators and related occupations. Tier is the skill level, which is 5, which is, that's always the 2nd digit of the NOC code. And then they have another convention beyond that I don't think has any rhyme or reason to it. This would not qualify. Why? Because we know in the Canada-Colombia Free Trade Agreement, just like Peru, professionals and technicians, professionals fall under tier 0 and 1, and technicians are typically under 2 or 3, okay? But they don't actually specify that here. Let me look at cook, for example. So cook is 63200. So it's a skilled job, right? But it doesn't qualify as a technician or a supervisor under the Canada-Colombia Free Trade Agreement because, well, number 1, it doesn't qualify under tier 0 or tier 1. So it's not a professional or managerial occupation. It's also not listed then on the technicians, okay? Under technicians here. So cooks doesn't, but chefs does qualify. So this is probably the most important part. Like, obviously you qualify if you've got a Colombian passport, and then you meet the other work permit issuance requirements like admissibility to Canada and others, which I will talk about in another video because it's generic and it can apply to different nationalities and different trade agreements and different exemptions and even LMIA based work permits. But let's look at, we'll go through with chefs and we'll do that as an example. But so the first thing you're going to want to do is, do you, or is it likely that you could be offered a position as any of these technicians, or offered a professional that's outside of any of these? So right now I can tell you, I know for a fact accounting, it's professional. Like an accountant, it's going to be tier 1, specialized occupation. Accounting manager, something like that, would be financial manager, would be an 0, NOC 0, because it's managerial. And those two examples are something that would qualify here because I don't see accountant listed, right? And I don't see finance manager, right? We see managers in health, education, social, and community services. So you're really just going to be trying to navigate the NOC. And this is going to depend upon your situation. If you're looking for a job in Canada, you're going to say, okay, what can I be hired for? What am I working in right now in Colombia? Does it qualify under the FTA? If it doesn't, can you change your occupation, right? Or, for example, if you're a cook in Colombia, how could you be hired as a chef in Canada, right? Start working as a chef in Colombia, or look at getting a certification to practice in that occupation. That is what I would recommend. Like, this is the process you're going to have to go through if you want to save money on just talking with a consultant or paying somebody for an eligibility assessment. You can do all this work on your own. You can dig through it and say, okay, yeah, you know what? I'm an electrical engineer in Colombia. I can work as an electrical engineering technologist in Canada, right? Can you? Well, let's look into it. You have to then say, okay, let's do it for that example specifically. Electrical engineering technologist, we have, yeah, this is it. Electrical and electronics engineering technologists and technicians. And they have a requirement to it, which is including electronic service technicians. So let's try and find it in the, here, electrical engineering, and that should be a tier level 2. So this is, I'm going to post all these links so you guys can see where to look for this stuff. So you can do your own research and qualify yourself and start searching in the right direction for jobs in Canada or for employer sponsorship and support. It's taking forever to load. So engineering managers, these would qualify as far as I'm concerned because it's a tier 0 and it's professional. Like, you're probably part of an engineering society, right? Professional Engineers of Ontario or the Alberta Professional Engineers Geologists Association. This would qualify as well. It's a tier 1, so for engineers. Now, you also need to consider, if you're going to be working as an engineer in Canada, you need, like, specifically an engineer, you need to be licensed as an engineer to practice, okay? So you want to look into that too. The work permit might not be approved if you're unable to be licensed as an engineer, or you don't have like a preliminary licensing, or you can't work as, let's say, an engineer in training, okay? That will come into work permits, and that's a later discussion. But engineering, electrical engineering technologists, great. So here is the occupation, and yeah, they talk about the tier, and occupations usually require a college diploma or apprenticeship training. And they talk about, yeah, this is the this is eligible. So these are the main duties that electronics technologists do, and these are the ones that technicians do. And these are the employment requirements, which you likely meet these, or else you probably couldn't be hired in this position. Okay. And this is where they give you all the information and what IRCC is going to reference if you can qualify for that. So if you are a construction laborer right now, and you don't have any experience as an electrical engineering technician, and you want to come to Canada to work as a lighting technologist, yeah, that's not possible. But you could do work in Colombia, or you could prepare to then be qualified to be given a job offer, for example. Or if you're on an open work permit, you could be hired in this position, right? There's no requirements to be licensed or certified, okay? But if you have an engineering degree from Colombia, maybe you finished a couple-year diploma here in Canada, you'll likely qualify, right? So this is what you're going to be spending your time on, looking, okay, can you qualify for one of these positions, right? Now, let's say you do. Let's now get to the point where I've showed you the resources you have. You look at the NOC. We can go back to look at it from a hierarchy and structural view, but here are everything. The first digit represents the broad occupational category. We know we're probably not eligible in any of the health occupations. They said education, law, and social. That was also exempted for the professionals there. Okay, and art, culture, that was exempted. And then in terms of the trades, yes, there was many trades that were available. Sales and service, some of these management positions would likely qualify under the professionals stream, okay? And let's look at these would not qualify because they're not retail sales supervisors and service supervisors working at a store. In retail, they would not qualify because it's tier 2, right? And for professionals, you need to be in tier 0 or 1. For technicians, you can be, they don't specify the tier, but they specify the technicians that are allowed, okay? So that's the process you're going to follow. This is the NOC where you find your occupation. Now, I'll also show you, because this will become important later on. So how does it then work? Let's say you are a chef, okay? Or you're qualified to work as a chef, and this could be for anybody wanting to work as a chef in Canada and you're in Colombia. Wanting to work as a chef in Canada, you're a visitor from Colombia and you're in Canada and you're trying to find jobs, or you're already working as a chef on an open work permit and you're looking to extend your status, or you're looking to get arranged employment to help you with permanent residence. This would then apply to you. So, okay, you're working as a chef or you're offered a job as a chef, okay? How do you go about then just applying for the work permit, right? Well, can you apply with just the job offer from the employer? No. In all cases, the employer, I should say not in all cases, but in the vast majority, like 99% of cases, the employer is going to have to submit an offer of employment through either the employer portal, or they're going to have to get you an LMIA, right? That's the Temporary Foreign Worker Program or the International Mobility Program. In this case, it would be the LMIA exemption under Canada-Colombia Free Trade Agreement. So what is the employer going to have to do? They're not going to have to do an LMIA, so they're going to save 5 months on processing. They're going to save $1,000 on the fee, and they're going to save consultation charges to get the LMIA approved. They're not going to have to wait as long to hire you, right? If you're in Canada with valid status and your employer submits an offer of employment through the employer portal, that takes less than an hour, and they get that offer number, you could flagpole at the border the next day and get a work permit in hand. Okay, if you're eligible to flagpole, which means you're in Canada with valid status. And flagpoling isn't always recommended, okay? So don't take that as legal advice. But you could also just apply online and wait 113 business days or whatever the processing time is right now. But at least your employer doesn't have to go through the LMIA process. So when you are a foreign worker, foreign national, or you're a visitor and you're trying to convert to this work status and you've got a Colombian passport, you really want to try and leverage this pathway first, okay? And I've assisted several clients now with this, and I've seen them go through and get approved, and it's a fantastic pathway for those with a Colombian passport. So let's say you've qualified yourself for one of these positions, or you're likely to get hired as a chef. You've got 5 years experience, or you're working in Canada right now as a chef. What's then the next process? Well, your employer has to submit the offer through the employer portal. That's the only support you really need from the employer. Of course, they're giving you a job or they're offering you a full-time job, and they're willing to submit that offer through the employer portal so that you can then use the number they get to then apply for a work permit, okay? Because if they didn't have offers of employment being verified by Canadian employers with a Canadian CRA business number, then a bunch of people would just be applying for fraudulent, fake, phony, closed work permits, right? Which you can imagine would be problematic. So that's why they have this verification process through the employer portal. So I'll post this link where you can, find your occupation. And again, when you're submitting your work permit application, you want to show this link, right? Or you want to highlight the job. You're a chef. You print this off, print screen it, PDF it, say, hey, look, based on the free trade agreement, I qualify. Or this is on the global affairs. So you could even say, your IRCC's website says to reference Peru. And it says that, yeah, the technicians are included, and there's the chef right there, chefs. So we've showed you how to look through the NOC, right? How to figure out if you qualify for a professional or a technician or technical occupation. And technician's a bit of a misnomer because there's also supervisors and contractors and supervisors in trades that are qualified. Now, you don't normally think about somebody who's in, let's say, a pipe fitting trade, like as a pipe fitter or a pipe fitting contractor or a supervisor, as somebody who's a technician, right? We think of it as a trades-based occupation. So the wording's a little bit odd. So you're going to have access to this link. You're going to have access to NOCs where you can go break down and find exactly what job you're doing and in those duties and if it matches, okay? And can dig through and look and find everything that you need to, right? And make a case that you do qualify. So I now want to talk about the process the employer has to go to. So the employer has to go to literally, well, I'll open up a new window here. They go to employer portal and they go to here and they have to go continue to GC key. Then they're going to basically create if they don't already have an employer portal, if they're a large company, they likely already do, or somebody has already submitted some kind of offer through the employer portal, because you need to use it for provincial letter of support, like provincial nominees who now want to apply for a work permit. You need to use it for Francophone mobility program. So maybe they already created an employer portal, maybe not. But if they did with their tax number, then they should just log into the one that they created. Otherwise, they're going to have to sign up for a GC key. Okay, I have another video on how to create an employer portal account. And I do want to say, be aware that when your employer creates, maybe the employer should know, or they should watch this video, they should know that it's a really poor process. Like, they've got two-factor authentication, of course. They also have personal verification questions. They also, every time you get kicked out of the employer portal because it times out or whatever, it kicks you back to the IRCC homepage. So if you're not paying attention, you're just going to try and sign in with your employer portal GC key into the IRCC secure account as if the employer is an immigrant trying to submit a work permit application. So that's just, they designed it very poorly and there's technical problems with it. But let's say they do sign up, no issues. They'll usually get approved. It takes, honestly, 15 to 20 minutes to do that process, and you'll likely be approved within 5 minutes. The employer will get confirmation that their portal's been approved. Once their employer portal's been approved, because they have a valid CRA business number that's referenced through some website or database, they then have to log into the employer portal. So I put this, we log in, and now here's what the employer portal looks like. See, they confuse it. Why are they saying IRCC portal account? Well, they should change the header to say employer portal, but they don't. They have employer portal here. But when they say IRCC portal account, they make it seem like it's a GC key account for just applying for a work permit. So let's access the offer of employment queue, because I already did one as a demonstration. I'm going to delete this. I'm going to start from scratch, submit an offer of employment. This is what your employer, your prospective employer in Canada, has to do. And let's do it for the example of a chef. Business information, they need to complete this. This is quite self-explanatory. Business telephone number. What are they going to use as their business address? Whatever their business address is listed as with the CRA, right? Like, what is, if they registered their business at a home office or they use a co-working space, that's where it should be. But let's say they're a restaurant. But their business isn't, they don't use that as their business address. They use their home. That's what they should put here, right? because later on you're going to have the location of work address. But they should put here the business address, which is listed as their business address on documents. And then they have the option to put in a mailing address, right? Type of business, this is the legal structure of their business, okay? Most are going to be incorporated. That means, incorporation. If they're a franchise, yes or no, right? Now, business details, they need to have a web address. This is a mandatory requirement. If they're a really small restaurant and they don't, but they, have a menu online with skip the dishes, or they have a Google business page, that's what I would use. But most people will have a web address. Date business started, your employer. And now I'm going through the process explaining what your employer has to do. And a lot of employers aren't, up to date on this kind of knowledge. They don't, they're not dealing with the immigration system day in, day out. So part of this reason I'm doing this is to show you, so you can show your employer. So show them, send them the video, right? Or explain to them, hey, like, you just need to have a web address. Or, yeah, sure, Steve said, this is what he puts in there, or what he recommends and how it goes. But this is what your employer is going to do. So, okay, I got to submit an LMIA offer of employment. This is all pretty self-explanatory. Date business started. Usually either that's the date of incorporation or the grand opening. It really can be up to the business owner. When do they consider their business have started? They could consider it when they had their first client, or like a customer, let's say for a restaurant, or when they incorporated. Describe the principal business activity. This is, IRCC just wants to know, like, what line of business is this guy involved in, right? Is it, hairstyling, or is it IT? So this is where I would just say, literally, John's Fish and Chips is a, fast food takeout place, whatever. 1 sentence, 2 sentence description. That there's not a lot that needs to be there. And if they really don't want to trust themselves with a description of the principal business activity, they can just actually use the NAICS, which is the North American Industry Classification System, which this is like the NOC code, but for industries. And obviously I've looked at accommodation and food service, food services and drinking places, full service restaurants, and limited, just like the NOC code. Let's say it's a fish and chips place. Let's say it is a limited service eating place. This is literally what they do. This is the primary business activity, right? Canadian industry comprises engaged in providing food service to patrons, blah, blah, blah. That's it. Take that, copy and paste it, or just put in the code. Say 722512, because that's what they're asking for. So let's go back to, they do mention that here, right? Like, you can put the North American Industry Classification. Number of employees. This is, most employers are going to be under 100 in Canada that are doing this kind of support for you. Gross revenue. This, it's not going to be less than 30,000. It's going to be 30 to 5 million for the vast majority of people submitting through the employer portal. And if it is over 5 million, fantastic. They've got a massive business, right? But this should be, you've got to consider the employer portal is signed up for and created using the CRA business number. So what is the revenue reported of that company under that CRA business revenue number? Like, if you're a Popeyes franchise or McDonald's franchise and you're doing less than 5 million a year, yeah, you would put 30,000 to 5 million. Just because McDonald's Corporation is a multi-billion-dollar company doesn't mean you should put over 5 million. I hope that makes sense. Now, the other section, yeah, primary contact. This is who will be contacted by IRCC for further information. This would be likely the person submitting the offer for you, likely the HR, the hiring manager. This could be the business owner if it's a small business. Likely just the employer would put their information here, okay? Secondly, once that's completed and the employer has done everything correctly and the numbers are the right format, because they do have a specific format for phone numbers and not allowing parentheses and special characters, it'll show up as green. Then you've got the foreign worker section. This is where your prospective employer is going to require your passport, because last names, first names, this should match identical to your passport. Gender, date of birth, country of birth, okay? Country of residence, because this is the foreign worker form. Country of residence should be where you're currently living. So if you're overseas right now in Colombia, that would be Colombia. If you're in Canada and you're working or studying, yes, obviously your country of residence is Canada. Citizenship would be obviously Colombian, or else you wouldn't qualify for this free trade agreement. Now, I do want to also mention country of residence. If you're here as a visitor, this is a bit iffy. I would say country of residence, you're not technically living in Canada if you're a visitor. You're just visiting. You don't have status. Like, you can't get a driver's license. You can't get a bank account. You don't have health care. Like, you're not on a study permit. You're not on a work permit. You're not considered valid. Like, you are on valid status as a visitor. But, I mean, it's a little bit questionable and confusing. If you were a visitor and you're in Canada, I would put for country of residence Colombia, because that is where you reside and you're just visiting Canada. Then there's passport number. Okay, so you put in passport number. Yeah, I know. It's not going to let me go forward, so I'll go back. So they're going to basically need the bio page of your passport, the employer or the consultant, if a consultant's guiding the employer through this process. Job details. This is where I guess your employer should be a little bit cognizant that these details do matter. If they do the wrong exemption code or title, or they put in incorrect things about your job duties, that could result, like, this is as good as that offer of employment, like that you, like when somebody gives you a job offer, right? So this has to be filled out correctly. I recommend that employers who haven't done this often, they should just get a consultant to review it. It shouldn't take more than 30 to 45 minutes, because just to make sure that they're not going to put anything incorrect. Some things that could derail then the subsequent work permit application would be wrong exemption code, right? Maybe they say, oh, Colombia, yeah, they're, management trainee. No, right? Like professionals or technicians. That's what chef falls under, right? So it's F12. Now, please explain in your own words how you meet the LMIA exemption. Provide as much detail as possible. Well, like I said, the requirements for this exemption are quite simple. You are Colombian national, Colombian, applicant, qualifies under FTA, blah, 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 and is being hired in eligible occupation as per, and then you can put in the links or whatever. But usually this should just be like 1 or 2 sentences. Reason I love to put a heck of a lot of supporting documentation in the work permit, like showing the pages on the immigration website where it shows the occupations, talking about the Canada-Colombia Free Trade Agreement. I don't like to put it in the employer portal because there's a lot of restrictions here. And I know that they're not going to be looking at your employer portal without looking at the work permit. Because what they do first is they get the work permit application. Then on the work permit application that the applicant, the Colombian, has submitted will have an A number on it. That A number is what the employer has given you, which references the IRCC officer to what they've submitted here. Okay, so officers can be looking at your work permit first. You can put in a ton of supporting evidence as to how you meet the LMIA exemption. I wouldn't expect your employer to go above and beyond and understand and go through all these links and put all this supporting documentation in there. That's just, they're in the business of, you know, fish and chips, or they're a restaurant, right? So they're not going to be super knowledgeable on this. So it would just be a 1 sentence here, just to say Colombian applicant qualifies under the FTA, being hired as a chef in an eligible technical occupation as a technician. Job title. This is what they're going to be hiring you as. Okay, so let's say you're, you know, sous chef. But let's say they want to call you a short order cook. Is that a good idea? It's not a good idea, and I'll show you why. So we know that the occupation that qualifies is chef. So let's go check out chef in the NOC, okay? Chef is 6.2, no, not in services. Let's just search for it. Yeah, I didn't want to go through all the nested accordions there. So chefs plan and direct food. This is the lead statement. So basically just a quick description of like what the occupation is. We can see that it's tier 2, so it is skilled. And we know that chefs, like this not broad occupational category, but the actual occupation, the NOC 62200, is indicated on the positive list that it's allowed. Okay, these are example titles. Nothing here says cook. Okay, so if they're hiring you as a cook, that's not going to look good to the officer, because the officer is then going to go look at cook on the NOC codes, and cook is 6.3. Cook is, yes, it's still a skilled occupation, but it doesn't qualify under the positive list on the Canada-Colombia Free Trade Agreement. Okay, so make sure that the title makes sense, right? And this could be assistant chef, it could be saucier, it could be sous chef, whatever. And this is where the main duties are found for chefs. So you want your job offer from your employer to kind of match, if you're doing sous chef, you want it to match these. Employment requirements, you should meet that's on the work permit processing side, but you need to have the ability to do the work. So if you have zero experience, there's no way that provable experience, there's no way that an IRCC officer is likely going to approve your work permit application as a chef, right? Because it says here, sous chefs usually require several years of experience in commercial food preparation. Several years. So you've got to be able to prove that, whether it's in Colombia or in Canada. Completion of secondary schools usually required. So in your work permit application, if you have a secondary school completion, great. You want to get a WES, Educational Credential Assessment, and show that you exceed or meet the requirements, okay? This is where it talks about, because then there's executive chef, and if you're in food service, these are all kind of different variations of the same broad occupational, the same NOC code here. So this is going to be important. Now, maybe your employer hasn't given job offers in the past, or they're not familiar with like the wording on it. Can they copy and paste? Pretty much, but I would still say tailor it to the job duties that are specific to that location. Because in this case, for example, if it's a fish and chips place, right? Let's say a really special, fancy one. They don't cater to banquets, really. I mean, fish and chips would be horrible at a banquet. It's only good like 5 to 10 minutes after preparation. So in that case, your employer could modify these duties a little bit, and you could modify them to better represent their company, right? Like work with the employer to make that happen, work with the consultant to make it a bit better. But you still kind of want about 70 or 80% to kind of overlap and make sense here. So let's say your employer does give you just an actual, like a PDF or a Word version of a job offer. How do you know if it's, the right NOC code? How do you know it's chef and not cook? Well, you can compare the duties of both and say, okay, yeah, there's more duties I'm doing that are chef. I'm being paid the salary of a chef or the wage of a chef. It leans towards chef. So one thing you can do that's a really simple, easy way is you could literally copy and paste these job duties into ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT, what NOC code does this best represent? And if it's pumping out cook, line cook, you're running into trouble, right? You might have duties that are more in line with cook, and that could create some problems on your work permit issuance, because if it's not the right occupation, it's not a genuine job offer, and they can refuse the work permit application, okay? So this will be your best friend. Once you've narrowed down the occupation, really utilize this, the example titles. Let's say they are hiring you, as a sous chef in this very fancy fish and chips place. Okay, so let's go back to now the employer portal. So the employer here should put 1 sentence, 2 sentences, and because you can't really trust your employer to know all the labor market impact assessment exemption and how you meet those requirements, that's what you want to really emphasize in your work permit application. But that's why I'm saying you have the opportunity to. So expect this to be like 1 sentence. Job title, this is where you put obviously sous chef or whatever they're calling you. And the title ideally is in one of the example titles or very closely related to the example titles, okay? Let's look at now the NOC code, and this is where you're putting in the NOC code. So your employer has to get your NOC code right. Like, they might be going through this quick, think it's simple, and just say, oh yeah, you know what? Yeah, cook. There it is. No, it's not a cook. It's a chef. Okay? Address of the primary physical job location. If John's Fish and Chips has one location, this is where it would go. Okay? I always get a lot of questions on, yes, if the worker would perform duties at more than one location, you could put yes and get a second location on your work permit, okay? If it's just one, it'll just be one. If it's 5 locations, unfortunately, the portal only allows 2. So you're probably going to just have 1 or 2 primary locations. Expected start date of employment. And if you did get in that case, if they did for some reason want you to work in 7 different locations, because they had 7 different locations in one small town, you would probably just have to submit a letter of explanation with your work permit and say, I'm also seeking approval to work at these 7 locations, right? In addition, because the portal only allows you to do 2. Expected start date of employment. Obviously, you can't backdate this, right? You can only go to the day that it is today, and this won't validate because we're past January 1st now. But people always ask me, well, what is it? Well, expected start date, I usually keep it under 6 months away. Of course, IRCC's taken 10 to 12 months on some work permit applications from outside the country, and the expected start date of employment is no longer kind of valid. But just know that this isn't super important. It just needs to be within the near future because they are hiring you like imminently. Obviously, if you put 3 years out, they're going to say, why the heck are you applying for a work permit now when the offer of employment, once they submit, is only valid for 60 days in the portal? Why are you applying now for a work permit, you won't need to start working for 3 years, right? So usually I put about a month from the day you're submitting, or, a couple months out, and make it nice. So like right now it is January 9th or something. I would do February 28th or March 7th. Just note that this day, it's kind of nice. I like to match this day up with the start date on your work permit application, because on your 1295 form, which is the form everybody has to complete for a work permit application from outside Canada, or even the one from inside Canada, you're going to have to put like your expected start date of employment. Duration of employment, this is a text field. I always put 3 years, right? You will get up to 3 years for a skilled job. Even for unskilled jobs, Francophone Mobility Program, my client recently got 3 years. Always just try and get the max, which is 3 years. Main duties of the job, that's what we saw in the NOC, right? This is where your employer might make a mistake. Like your employer might say, what do I put here? Like main duties of the job, I don't know, sous chef for the fish and chips joint. That's not really descriptive enough, right? If they're really lazy, they could just copy and paste from the NOC, right? They could go here and they could, not here. They could go here and they could copy and paste main duties under sous chef. But you like to add a bit of customization to it, right? Have a couple duties that are more specific to that place. Probably remove the banquets one because you're not, like I said, preparing banquets for fish and chips, unless it stays good, unless it's a special type of fish and chips that stays really great after 10 minutes. Put the main duties of the job in there. Employer will struggle if they have too many duties or they've exceeded the text limit. There are limits in these text boxes. They don't specify what the limits are. I've put in special characters and then it says no special characters allowed. I've removed all special characters and it still has problems, and then it's because I've put in too much text. So try and keep this to like the NOC main duties, and I'd say within 70% similarity, only about 30% variance. Now, and you don't want to go stray way too far outside the duties, like running delivery van, like that's a driver, right? Or if it's like managing front of the house staff, marketing work, you don't want to put in all these duties that are way outside. You can sometimes have a few duties, right? But you want the main, I'd say 70%, the bulk, to be chef. And you can also ask GPT, if you put in like delivery driver and this and that, like what are going to be the main NOC codes that it's going to give you. So minimum education requirements for the job. And the reason I recommend GPT is because it's a large language model. So it can literally look through all the different synonyms and different meanings and kind of understand, okay, what does this best represent? Main duties or minimum education requirements for the job. Obviously, you don't want your employer to put PhD, because this is where they're going to be. One of the work permit issuance prohibitions is making sure that you can perform the work sought. So if IRCC sees that, oh, well, they said the minimum education requirement for this chef at John's Fish and Chips is a doctorate or PhD. Yeah, I'm afraid that our, chef from Colombia does not have a doctorate or PhD, right? So minimum education requirements for your employer should probably be referencing the NOC, but it's likely vocational diploma, certificate. It could also be secondary school. That's usually required. Any of these pretty much are going to be okay. If they wanted to say no formal education requirement, they should put in what they mean here, right? They should say, like, I don't care if somebody has a high school degree. I care that they have 5 years experience. But if they put that in there, then you better be able to show you have 5 years experience. This is like the job offer. So it's important to know what your employer is putting on this. So you may also want to request, if you can, and if you're trying to do this as DIY and self-directed, that either you refer your employer to this video to watch, or employer reviews it with a consultant, or employer fills in everything, validates all the forms, and then screenshots it and sends it to you so you have a copy. So it's like, yeah, I expect you to start March 1st. So for your work permit, you can put March 1st on your IMM form. Under here, experience and skills required to complete the job. This is required. This should be just like 1 or 2 sentences, and it should be very similar to what you would expect to see in the NOC, right? This should probably be, for a good sous chef, probably 2 to 3 years experience, right? And that also depends on wage. Like if you're getting paid $150,000 a year in a 5-star, then yeah, okay, maybe you need 10 years experience and some certifications and accolades. But for the most part, you're going to want to try and keep the experience to, the employer should be putting the experience that they really need for the position, right? Or what you purport to have. Right? If you have 3 years experience, the minimum requirement, yeah, several years experience as a sous chef, okay? Let's go back now to the portal, and I know I've really dragged this on. Of course, like, skip through the parts that matter to you, but I want to really just dive deep into this because I feel like there's a lot of missed opportunity for a lot of Colombians in Canada, and this also applies to Peruvians. It applies to Chileans because they have their own FTAs. So just keep that in mind, that you can skip through. Are there provincial or territory licensing requirements for the job? Well, for chef, there are. Okay, but they're not required, right? And it says that in the NOC here. For the NOC, employment requirements, it doesn't say cooks, trade certification, or equivalent credentials, training, and experience are required. So if you've got credentials, training, and experience, you're good. That's just saying that's required. As long as you can prove that in your work permit, you're good. Are available to qualified chefs. Red Seal endorsement is also available. Usually require, right? Sous chefs usually require several years of experience. So you know what? If you've got several years experience, you can prove it. That's all you need. Completion of secondary school is usually required. So the minimum education requirement actually to be a chef is probably just secondary school. That's the minimum. Of course, if you have training from Colombia and you want the officer to consider that, then put that in your work permit application, right? Get it translated. Get a WES, like an education credential assessment that shows the equivalence of that in Canada. So back to here. Now, this would be, yeah, you would say, yes, there is. What are the certifying licenses? You can say it is and specify like not a requirement, right, for employment. But there are several licensing bodies. And in this case, there are, but they're not really requirements. So you could say you want to put the information here that it's not a requirement, but you probably want to say that yes, that there are, right? And link to then all the ones that are in the NOC, or yeah, in the job ESDC. So back to, you could also, I think you could also put no, but because there are, and then this gives you the opportunity to add more, I always like adding more information and more clarification if you can. So are there employer compliance fees? Yes, I'll be paying the employer compliance fee. The employer will be. Primary contact, this would be, yeah, the employer that's filling this out or the HR manager. Now, let's go back out to, we've done job details. So we'd have a green check here, green check, green check. Now we're on wage and benefits, okay? So yes, they're going to be paying you directly, right? No would be in the case of like startup visa, where you have alternate compensation schemes. You just got to show proof of funds. Or if it's like a staffing company, right, and you're being paid through some kind of, I don't know, alternative arrangement. Or if it's like volunteer, there's some kind of certain occupations in here that fall under certain, that don't require an employer compliance fee. So in many cases, it's just going to be for a job offer. Yeah, they're going to be paying you. Type of wage, you have dollars per hour, dollars per year. What's frustrating about this is they actually have more than the variables required that you need. So you've got wage amount, then you've got work hours, then you've got work hours per week, then you've got work hours per month. Well, so you're going to say, okay, it has to be at least 30, but it depends upon what they are offering. If you're offering you 35 hours a week, you'd put in 35 hours a week. If they're expecting you to work 8 hours a day, that's, 8 hours per day, not 35 per week, 35 per day, 35 per week. And how many per month? To multiply a week, how many weeks are in a month? 4 or 4.3? I do it by 4.3 because that's the accurate way. But then you would put in the total work hours per month. The employer has to put in your overtime rate. So let's say you are getting paid 25 an hour as a chef, and the overtime rate would be time and a half, right? For most provinces, as far as I know. Overtime starts after usually 44 hours per week. And this is where they want to put in additional information or additional alternate compensation. Additional information might be like if it's seasonal, but it's not, it wouldn't qualify for, a full-time job offer. Or if additional information might be like you get tips, right? If you want to declare that in here, I don't think it's necessary to declare on the offer of employment, but in here, tip sharing, right? So this is where your employer would put benefits if applicable, and they should put your vacation, right? Like they pay you 4% vacation. They will know all this. The HR manager will know all this, and they should put as much detailed information as possible as they can here, okay? Once this is completed and you have 4 green check marks, they can basically then click submit, continue. Once they continue, they'll be given one more screen, which basically says, do you want to upload any supporting documentation that shows how you meet the LMIA exemption? I think that's not a good place to upload supporting documentation. You're expecting your employer to make the case for how you meet the requirements. Employers are not immigration consultants. At this point, I never upload anything in the supporting documents. Where I upload every supporting document is in the actual work permit application. So, and it is an optional field, so if they don't upload anything, you're fine. Then you go to, they make payment, it's $230. Once payment is complete, they should screenshot, okay? Let your employer know, please screenshot the proof of payment, because for the last 2 years, or for longer than that, the employer portal has not been issuing official receipts. And in addition to, after they've made that payment, within 5 minutes to their email inbox, they're going to get your offer of employment number, okay? It starts with an A, and they're going to get your offer of employment number. Additionally, on their employer portal, they're going to get it's going to show that the offer of employment was submitted. It's not the easiest thing to find. The search function's really pathetic on it. They would then be able to go back in and see it here under the access offer of employment queue, and they would see, oh, submitted, and it would say offer of employment number, and it would be right there. It would say A, whatever. They need to give that to you. And if you really want to impress IRCC, they can give you a screenshot of the payment receipt as well, because now they've paid the fee and there's offer of employment. But you can't really, I mean, their system, like I said, it's not issuing the official receipts, so it's just like a good thing to just show the officer you know what you're doing. That's it. You've got your offer of employment. Now it's time to apply for your work permit. And I'll go into another video about how that works. But basically, I wanted to show you the employer side process. So if you are an employer and you found this useful, great. If you have an employer that wants to hire you, show them this process. If they want, I'll probably introduce some kind of easy product or service where people could basically, once they've completed everything, screenshot all this data and information and just send it to me and say, hey, does this look good to submit? What's it missing? Because then in the second part, I'm going to talk about like what the officer is going to use to evaluate the genuineness of your work permit and the supporting documents you want to have. We'll do it for chef too. Why not? And go from there. So thank you so much for watching. I mean, I know it was quite a lengthy video, but I wanted to show every nitty-gritty detail of this employment portal and everything that needs to be considered. The final thing I would like to show is that, you know, in addition to the employer offering you the right job duties, title, them being the reason they want that web address and principal business activity, they want to do a public information search. Look up John's Fish and Chips. See if it's a legitimate business that actually would need to hire a chef, right? Because otherwise people would just submit offers of employment for a chef, but they're running a barbershop, right? That's just not, there's not a reasonable employment need to have a chef working at a barbershop unless the barbershop is like a totally different barbershop that serves food and everything. So now on to the one other thing I do want to mention is that the wage is a little bit important, what they're going to be offering you. So let's say they're hiring you as a chef, sous chef, and they want to pay you $15 an hour. As a foreign worker, you may say, well, this is a great opportunity for me to come work in Canada. I know I'm being underpaid. The market rate as a sous chef, they're offering me $15 an hour, 40 hours a week. You know, I can do it. In that case, the officer for the work permit side, they will look at certain tables and guides to determine if they think that you're being paid a fair wage. So if they see somebody hired as a chef for $15 an hour, there's a good chance that they may question the genuineness of the offer. That might cause a negative impact on the Canadian labor market, right? If you think about it, if we started importing Canada a lot of cheap foreign labor, that would not be good for our standard of living. It would not be fair to the newcomers. It's just a wrong way. So that's bad for the labor market. They don't want to drive down and suppress wages, okay, for skilled work like being a chef. So it's important that your job offer is reasonable. So how do you know if it is reasonable? And this is where you're going to make an argument in your work permit application, and I'll dive deeper into that. But you look at the review of wages, occupation, and working conditions provided to foreign workers, okay? Well, you don't look at this. This is what the officer's looking at. This is part of the operation manuals and guidelines. This is processing a review of wages, assessing medical requirements, all these things. This is how they're checking your work permit, okay? But let's go see, it's actually on the job bank, all these links. You're working as a chef. Let's say John's is in St. John, New Brunswick, okay? So chef. It doesn't matter if you're chef or sous chef, right? It's the same, like it's still 62200. Even though the title is different, okay? It's still the same NOC code. So you could use sous chef or you could use chef. It's still going to show you the same table. Now, here it's showing you the median hourly rate for a chef in Canada is $20 an hour, okay? The low is 15. So you know what? Maybe they could get away with giving you a minimum wage as a chef because it is the low starting wage. Like inexperienced chefs are getting $15 an hour, it looks like. If we look at where you're being offered the job, which is in the province of New Brunswick and it's in St. John, St. Stephen, okay. median wage is $17.48 an hour, which means if the employer were to hire you on an LMIA, they would have to offer you at least that much per hour, $17.48, because you cannot apply for an LMIA in almost all cases where the prevailing wage that you're offering the foreign national is below the median. The median's right here, okay? The median wage in that region. If you can't find the median wage in the region because the region's too small, like this, not applicable, you have to use the provincial median wage, okay, for an LMIA. So if somebody was getting a chef in the Nord du Quebec region, they would have to go to offer them at least $28.08 an hour. $21.08 per hour, okay? So this is also where you can add more supporting documents for your work permit application. Let's say you're getting paid $19 an hour in St. John. Well, you would say, okay, I'm getting paid above the median. You'd emphasize that. But you want to be between this range and you want to be close to the median. You don't have to be at the median. I've seen applications get approved below the median. But you don't want to be like outside, I'd say, the range or like questionably low salary. And that really comes into part on the professional occupations. Like you're being hired as an engineer at $15 an hour, they're going to refuse that work permit. No way an EIT is working for $15 an hour, and no way that's even close to the starting wage. I'm talking engineer. So let's see what it is for electrical engineer, just because I'm curious. Man, make it so hard to find. This like a civil engineer. Let's do civil engineer. Civil engineer in St. John. Yeah, $27 an hour is the starting. So if you're getting offered $15 an hour, they're probably going to refuse that work permit because it's not a genuine job offer, because a civil engineer or an engineer in training does not get paid less than $27 an hour starting. Okay, so you want your wage to kind of fall within these two this range, and that's it. And I know it was a long video, and thank you for watching, and I hope it was very informative. And I'll do the next one on, like, let's say you do get your employer to go through that process, you get the offer number, okay, what do you need to include in your application, and we'll go from there.